This is the third episode in our series on the Chola Empire. I've posted links to episode 1 and 2 in the description. In the last episode, Rajendra the Great left a large and prosperous empire in the hands of his capable son, Rajadhiraja. By the time of his father's death in 1044, Rajadhiraja had been co-regent for almost 30 years and had contributed to many Chola war victories both at home and overseas. So we know that by the time of his coronation, he was already a proven warrior and a capable commander. Rajadhiraja continued his father's efforts and consolidated power by subduing several minor revolts after his father's death. Two years after his coronation, the Chola Dynasty's age-old rival, the Western Chalukyas, rose up in rebellion in 1046 AD. Rajadhiraja personally led a Chola army to the banks of the Krishna and defeated a Chalukya coalition at Dhanada. He also sacked the Chalukyan capital Basavakalyan in present-day Maharashtra and vassalized the surrounding region. For the next few years, Rajadhiraja was constantly at war in the borderlands of the Chola Empire. History tells us that he was a great warrior who led his armies to battle in person. Unfortunately, Rajadhiraja's rule came to a sudden end at the Battle of Koppam against Someswara I, the Chalukyan king in 1054 AD. In the Battle of Koppam, Rajadhiraja led his army on the charge, just as he had done many times. But on this particular siege, the emperor was injured while riding his war elephant and succumbed to his wounds on the battlefield. His brother, Rajendra Chola II, who was there with him on the battlefield, rallied the withdrawing Chola army and snatched victory from the brink of defeat. He pushed back the Chalukyas to the borders of the Chola Empire and proclaimed himself king at the end of the war. Rajendra Chola II ruled for 12 years from 1051 to 1063 AD until the crown passed on to Virarajendra. It's unclear what happened to Raja Mahendra, his son and the rightful heir to the Chola crown. But both father and son disappear from history without a trace. Maybe they fled the kingdom or were assassinated in a family feud, which allowed Virarajendra to ascend the throne of the Chola Empire. Virarajendra Chola was another son of Rajendra Chola I. He ruled the Chola Empire from 1063 to 1070 AD. His short reign was marred with rising conflicts from Sri Lanka and the Chalukyas. He struggled to maintain a losing grip on Chola overseas territories in present-day Malaysia and Indonesia. Like his father and grandfather, Virarajendra was at constant war with the Western Chalukyas. During a campaign in the Chalukya kingdom, Virarajendra interfered in a succession dispute between two brothers, Someswara and Vikramaditya. Their father had appointed the eldest son, Someswara, as the heir, but Vikramaditya was vying for the Chalukyan crown. Vikramaditya immediately switched sides and joined the Cholas, something a Western Chalukyan had never done in generations. Virarajendra helped Vikramaditya defeat his brother and gain control of the Chalukyan kingdom. As a sign of peace, Virarajendra married one of his daughters to Vikramaditya, and in return, Vikramaditya became a tributary and subordinate of the Cholas. Virarajendra died in 1070 AD. Soon after his death, revolts broke out in the Chola capital Cholappuram and the surrounding areas. Vikramaditya, who was now Vikramaditya VI of the Western Chalukya kingdom and ally of Virarajendra, led an army to Chola country to quell the revolt and relieve Atirajendra, who was besieged in his own palace. Vikramaditya remained in the capital for 30 days before returning to his home city. But peace was short-lived. A few weeks later, civil unrest broke out again in the Chola capital, and Atirajendra was killed in chaos. In the confusion that followed, Kulutanga I invaded the country and crowned himself the king of the Cholas. Kulutanga was a descendant of the Eastern Chalukya royal family, and he was the maternal grandson of Emperor Rajendra Chola I through the latter's daughter, Amanga Devi. His father was the Eastern Chalukya king Rajaraja Narendra, who himself was the son of Kundavai, the younger sister of Rajendra Chola I and the daughter of Rajaraja Chola. Kulutanga was brought up in the court of Rajendra Chola in Gongaikonda Cholapuram. During his youth, Kulutanga participated in many wars, serving alongside both Rajendra and his successors. There are conflicting accounts of how Kulutanga came to power, but the general consensus among historians is that by 1070 AD, Kulutanga was lord of the Vengi kingdom at the northern edge of the Chola Empire. When he heard of the anarchy and usurpers in the south, Kulutanga gathered his army and marched south to claim the throne. We are not sure if Kulutanga and his army marched into Gongaikonda Cholapuram as invaders or liberators. If they were invaders, Kulutunga's descendants made sure any historical narratives painting their ancestor in a bad light were destroyed. Anyway, it was clear from the time Kulutunga ascended the throne that a confrontation with the Western Chalukyas was imminent, as Vikramaditya VI could never accept the union of the Chola and Vengi kingdoms under the same ruler. Any hopes of support that Vikramaditya had from the Cholas died with the end of the original Chola dynasty. This new line of Cholas from the north were not his allies, and Vikramaditya was uneasy having a powerful foe to the east. Kulutunga's rise to power changed the power dynamic in the region. A war between Kulutunga and the royal houses of South India was bound to happen sooner rather than later. Kulutunga knew this from the very beginning and accordingly made preparations for the showdown, which happened in 1075 AD. The Chola army won a decisive victory against Vikramaditya. The defeat was so great that Western Chalukyas did not try to wage war against Kulutunga for as long as he lived. Overall, if you disregard the early years, Kulutunga's 52-year reign was generally peaceful and saw a revival of Chola culture. The king was also a great patron of the arts and ensured religious freedom for his subjects. He died in 1120 and was succeeded by his son. Vikrama Chola ascended the throne in 1120 after the death of his father. During his time, Sri Lanka slipped away even further from Chola control, and the Chola grip on the eastern Chalukya kingdom started to weaken. Kuludanga II succeeded Vikrama Chola to the throne in 1135 AD. He was made co-regent and heir around the year 1133, a few years before Vikrama Chola's death, but there is some uncertainty about his lineage. Some historians suggest that he may have been a close relative of Vikrama Chola and not his actual son. Kulutanga II maintained the Chola Empire as he had received it. He even expanded and reconquered eastern Chalukya lands that his predecessor had lost. Kulutanga was succeeded by his son, Rajaraja II, who in turn was succeeded by a grandson of Vikrama Chola, Rajadhiraja II. Rajadhiraja ruled the Chola Empire until 1178, when Kulutanga III was made king of the Cholas. History indicates that Rajadhiraja abdicated the throne to his successor and continued to be part of the royal court till his death in 1186 AD. Kulutanga inherited an empire in decline. He revitalized the failing administrative system and took back control of the feudal states that were slowly moving away from Chola control. But despite his efforts, he wasn't able to stop the growth of Pandya power. Rajaraja III succeeded Kulutanga to the Chola crown in 1216 AD. Although he ruled for 30 years, his entire reign was overshadowed by the growing power of the Pandyas in the south and another emerging power in the west, the Hoysalas. The only reason the Cholas managed to survive during this period was because neither the Pandyas nor the Hoysalas wanted Chola country to fall to the hands of their enemies. Throughout his reign, Rajaraja had to seek help from the Hoysalas to keep the invading Pandyans at bay. During the early 1240s, the situation in Chola country worsened even further, and the prominent ruling families broke away to form rebelling factions. By 1242 AD, Rajendra Chola III was able to wrest full control of the government administration from his brother. Subsequently, Rajaraja was murdered on the orders of Rajendra. Records indicate that Rajendra was a more capable ruler than his brother. He waged war with several Pandya kings and was able to turn the tide in favor of the Cholas. Hoysalas, who didn't want the Cholas gaining power, sided with the Pandyas and drove back the Cholas to their own lands. The late 1250s saw the rise of one of the greatest Pandyan kings, Jatavarman Sundar Pandyan. He united southern Tamil Nadu under his dominion and completely ran over Chola territory, thus subjugating them to a vassal state and relegating Rajendra the who was once a crown king, to a lowly feudal lord. Rajendra died in obscurity in 1279 AD, and the Chola country effectively became a part of the Pandya Empire. Thus came the end of one of India's greatest empires. Starting from the banks of the Kaveri in a small settlement in Thanjavur, and at their peak, ruling an empire that spread from North India to Southeast Asia. The story of the Cholas is one of myth and legends, kindness and betrayal, a story of brave warriors and cowardly kings, a story that affects millions of people every day, from what they speak and write to how they pray and even the way they dress. It is indeed one of India's greatest empires.